Porto Alegre, Brazil, 1994. A youth football pitch somewhere in the Vila Nova neighborhood. The grass was uneven. The goalposts were rusted. The nets had holes in them that nobody ever fixed because nobody ever had the money to fix them. And on that pitch, on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of a southern Brazilian summer, a 14-year-old boy was told he was not good enough. He didn't cry. He didn't argue. He picked up his bag, slung it over one shoulder, and walked off the pitch without looking back. The coach watched him go and felt, in that moment, completely justified in his decision. The boy was a dreamer, a showman, a child who wanted to make the crowd laugh more than he wanted to win. And winning, the coach believed, was the only thing that mattered. The boy's name was Ronaldo Gaúcho. Most people would come to know him simply as Ronaldinho. And that coach, the man who sent him away, had no idea that he had just made the most consequential mistake of his entire career. But this is not just a story about a boy who was cut from a squad. This is a story about what it means to misunderstand greatness. About the kind of talent that doesn't fit into boxes, that refuses to be measured by ordinary rulers. About a man who spent 10 years watching from a distance, as the child he dismissed changed the entire world's relationship with football. And about what he said, quietly, honestly, without excuses, when a journalist finally sat down with him and asked, "What did you get wrong?" That answer, when it came, was not what anyone expected, and it didn't just speak about Ronaldinho. It spoke about all of us. To understand what happened on that Tuesday afternoon in 1994, you have to understand what Porto Alegre was like in the early 1990s for a boy like Ronaldinho. This was not a city that produced footballers by accident. This was a city that breathed football the way it breathed air. Grêmio Maio and International, the two great clubs of Rio Grande do Sul, cast long shadows over every neighborhood, every school courtyard, every patch of open ground where children kicked balls against walls until their mothers called them in for dinner. In the Vila Nova neighborhood, where Ronaldinho grew up in a house with his mother Miguelina and his siblings, football was not a hobby. It was a language. It was how you made friends, how you earned respect, how you survived the particular loneliness of being a child in a city that moved fast and had little patience for softness. Ronaldinho's father, João de Assis, was a shipyard worker who had played amateur football and passed his love of the game to all his children. His older brother Assis had genuine professional talent of his own. But João died of a heart attack when Ronaldinho was only 8 years old. And so the game became something else entirely for the youngest son. It became the place where the grief went, the place where everything else disappeared. People who watched Ronaldinho play as a child described the same thing, again and again. He didn't play like a child trying to impress adults. He played like a child who had found the one place on earth where he was completely, entirely, perfectly free. Every touch of the ball was a conversation. Every move was a question he was asking the game itself. What else can we do? What else is possible? Where else can we go together? He played futsal first, the 5-a-side game on hard courts, and it was there that the technical foundation was laid. Touch, precision, quick thinking, small spaces, fast decisions. Ronaldinho absorbed all of it naturally, the way certain children absorb music or language, not by studying it, but by breathing it in. By the time he was 10, 11, 12, the things he could do with a football were beginning to look less like skill and more like conversation. He was not, however, an easy player to coach. This is the part that explains everything that comes next. Ronaldinho did not follow instructions the way coaches preferred. He followed instincts. When a coach said pass left, Ronaldinho would look left, see something more interesting to the right, and pass right. When a coach said play it simple, Ronaldinho would play it simple for 1 touch, 2 touches, and then, suddenly, produce something that no tactical manual had ever described. He could not always explain why he made the decisions he made. He just felt them. For some coaches, this was magnificent. For others, it was a problem. The youth coach in 1994 was a man who believed in the second category. He had spent many years working with young players in Porto Alegre, developing them through the youth systems of local clubs, trying to build disciplined, structured footballers who would have careers. He was not a bad man. He was not a cruel man. He was a man with a set of beliefs about what football required, and Ronaldinho, with his tricks, his laughter, his instinctive refusal to follow the prescribed path, did not fit those beliefs. The coach had given the boy chances, several chances. He had watched Ronaldinho do things in training that made other players stop and stare. Things that technically should not have been possible. Things that made the coach himself pause mid-sentence and forget what he had been saying. But then, he would watch Ronaldinho in a match situation, watch him choose the spectacular when the simple was available, watch him slow down when the game demanded urgency, watch him look around the pitch with an expression that seemed dangerously to suggest he was enjoying himself. For the coach, this was the red flag. Enjoyment was not the point. The point was discipline. The point was results. The point was developing players who could function within systems, who could follow instructions, who understood that football was a collective enterprise built on sacrifice and structure and tactical obedience. The day he made his decision, he called the boy over before the session ended and told him, in the direct way that coaches learn to speak when they have made up their mind, that he was not going to be included in the squad going forward. He told him that he had talent. He was not dishonest about this, but that talent alone was not enough. He told him that football required seriousness, commitment to the structure, a willingness to prioritize the team over individual expression. He used the word serious more than once. Ronaldinho, he said, did not play seriously enough. The boy listened. He nodded. He picked up his bag, and he left. What the coach did not know, what he could not have known, was that Ronaldinho went home that evening and told his mother what had happened. Miguelina, who had raised her children largely alone after the death of her husband, listened carefully. Oh, and then she said something to her youngest son that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. She told him that the way he played football, with joy, with freedom, with that particular light in his eyes that she had watched since he was small enough to kick a ball against the kitchen wall. That was not a weakness. That was exactly who he was. And that the people who could not see it were simply not looking at the right thing. He kept playing. He kept smiling. He kept doing the things that coaches told him were unnecessary, the things that spectators told each other afterward they had never seen before, the things that made children watching from the sides of pitches look at each other with wide eyes and ask, "Did you see that?" By the time Ronaldinho was 15, 16, the Grêmio Youth Academy had seen enough. They brought him in. Their coaches were experienced enough to recognize that what they were dealing with required a different approach. Not less structure, but a kind of structure that protected the freedom rather than eliminating it. Ronaldinho thrived. He had always been capable of thriving. He had simply needed people who understood what they were looking at. By 1998, he was in Grêmio's first team. By 1999, he was playing for the Brazilian national team. By 2001, Paris Saint-Germain had signed him, and the European football world was about to encounter something it was not quite prepared for. There is a particular quality that the greatest footballers possess that is almost impossible to describe and almost impossible to fake. It is the quality of inevitability. When they receive the ball, even before they have touched it, even before anything has happened, you feel something shift in the atmosphere of the stadium. Something that tells you, unconsciously, before your brain has caught up with your body, that something is about to happen. That the next few seconds are going to be different from all the other seconds around them. Ronaldinho had this quality more completely than almost any player of his generation. When he got the ball in space, the stadium held its breath. Not because it knew what was coming, but because it knew it did not know. Because the range of what was possible, genuinely possible, not theoretically possible, was so wide, so unpredictable, so entirely his own, that no defender and no crowd and no commentator could confidently predict the next 5 seconds. He arrived at Barcelona in 2003. And what happened there over the following 4 years remains one of the most extraordinary individual performances in the history of professional football. The Barcelona of that era, the Barcelona that Frank Rijkaard had built around Ronaldinho as its beating heart, played football that people of a certain age still talk about the way people talk about music they loved when they were young. With a kind of ache, with the knowledge that what they were witnessing was not permanent, was not something that could be repeated or manufactured, was specific to that particular combination of players and moment and freedom. Ronaldinho won the Ballon d'Or in 2004. He won it again in 2005. He won the UEFA Champions League in 2006. He won La Liga. He helped Brazil to the Copa América. And through all of it, through every trophy and every accolade and every highlight that spread across the early internet like wildfire, there was one thing that remained constant, one thing that never changed regardless of the score or the occasion or the importance of the moment. He was always smiling. This sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. In professional football at the elite level, the pressure is so relentless, so physically and psychologically punishing, that most players develop a kind of armor, a professional distance from joy. They love the game, but the love gets buried under expectation, tactical meetings, dietary plans, contract negotiations, journalists, fans demanding perfection, coaches demanding discipline. Ronaldinho never fully developed that armor. There was always something in him, something that no pressure or expectation could extinguish, that remained connected to the child in Porto Alegre who played football, because it was the best feeling in the world, and for no other reason. When he produced something brilliant on a pitch, you could see it in his face before the crowd had even reacted. He felt it first. The joy was his before he shared it. This is what made watching him different from watching other great players. Other great players could move you, could fill you with admiration, could make you feel the particular electric charge of witnessing excellence. Ronaldinho made you feel something closer to delight. He made football look like what it is in its most essential form, a game, something played for the love of it, something that exists at its core not to be won but to be experienced. November 19, 2005. Santiago Bernabéu Stadium, Madrid. Real Madrid versus Barcelona. Ronaldinho scored 2 goals that night that are still discussed whenever people try to name the greatest individual performances in the history of the Clásico. But the moment that people remember most, the moment that has been replayed more than any other, is not either of the goals. It is what happened after the second one. The Real Madrid supporters, 80,000 of them, stood up and applauded, not politely, not reluctantly, but genuinely fully, with the kind of spontaneous recognition that a crowd gives when it has just witnessed something that has exceeded the boundaries of rivalry, exceeded the boundaries of competition, exceeded even the boundaries of football itself. They applauded because they had just watched something they understood, somewhere deeper than football loyalty, to be extraordinary. Ronaldinho ran toward the corner flag. His arms were wide. His teeth were showing. He was laughing, at the top of his lungs. In the middle of the Santiago Bernabéu, surrounded by 80,000 people who supported the other team, he was laughing with pure joy. That image, that laughing run in front of the Bernabéu crowd, is one of the defining images of his career. Not a trophy, not a Ballon d'Or ceremony, a laugh, because the laugh contained everything. Now, back to Porto Alegre, back to the coach. His name is not widely known. He has asked, in the years since this story became public, that his full name not be used in connection with it. This is understandable. He is a private man. He was not a famous coach. He spent his career working at youth level, developing young players in Rio Grande do Sul, doing work that is largely invisible and largely thankless and largely unchronicled. He is not, by any measure, a villain. He is a man who made a decision that seemed sensible at the time and turned out to be catastrophically wrong. In 2004, when Ronaldinho won his first Ballon d'Or, a Brazilian sports journalist who was working on a long profile of Ronaldinho's early life tracked the coach down. The journalist had been told about the incident by one of Ronaldinho's childhood teammates, one of the boys who had been at training that day in 1994 and had watched the whole thing unfold. The journalist traveled to Porto Alegre, found the coach, and asked if he would speak about it. The coach agreed. He sat down. He was quiet for a long moment before he said anything. What he said, according to the journalist, who published the interview the following year, was this. He said that he had watched Ronaldinho at the 2002 World Cup in Japan and South Korea, watched him score that extraordinary free kick against England, watched him dribble through defenses with that particular combination of grace and mischief that was entirely his own, and had felt something complicated. Pride was part of it, which he acknowledged was absurd, given that he had played no role whatsoever in Ronaldinho's development. Admiration was part of it. And guilt was part of it. The particular guilt of a man who had been wrong in a way that mattered. He said that as he had watched Ronaldinho play over the years, at Paris Saint-Germain and then at Barcelona, he had spent a great deal of time thinking about the decision he made in 1994. Not to torture himself. He was not that kind of man. But because he was still coaching, still working with young players, and he felt that he owed it to those future players to understand where he had gone wrong. And what he had concluded, after years of thinking about it, was this: he had been trying to teach the boy football. But the boy already understood something about football that the coach himself did not understand. And because the coach did not understand it, he had mistaken it for a deficiency. What Ronaldinho understood intuitively in his body, before he had words for it, was that the joy was not separate from the talent. The joy was the talent, the freedom, the laughter, the instinct to try the thing that nobody expected. These were not distractions from the game. They were the source of everything that made him exceptional. When you took away the freedom, you took away everything. You were left with a technically gifted child who played safe. And safe, in football as in most things, is not the same as great. The coach had looked at the playfulness and seen indiscipline. He had looked at the tricks and seen selfishness. He had looked at the smile and seen a boy who was not taking things seriously enough. What he should have seen, what he told the journalist, quietly and without self-pity, that he should have seen, was a boy who had found a way to make football a direct expression of who he was. Not a performance of football, not an execution of football, an expression of it, as personal and as specific and as irreplaceable as a voice. He said, I told him football was serious. And he showed me that football was joy. And I was wrong about what serious meant. The journalist asked him if he had ever reached out to Ronaldinho, if he had ever tried to make contact. The coach said no. He had thought about it. But he felt that reaching out would have been for his own benefit, not for Ronaldinho's. Ronaldinho did not need his apology. Ronaldinho had not spent the past decade thinking about him. Ronaldinho had spent the past decade becoming one of the greatest footballers in the history of the world. The coach's decision had been a chapter in a story that turned out fine. More than fine. The apology would have been for the coach's own peace of mind, and he did not feel he deserved that peace of mind for free. This is the part of the story that stays with you. Not the success, not the trophies, not even the Santiago Bernabéu ovation. It is this coach, sitting in Porto Alegre, having watched everything unfold from a distance, having spent years thinking carefully and honestly about what he got wrong, and arriving at a conclusion that is simple and devastating and true. He was wrong about what serious meant. He had believed, as many people believe, as institutions believe, as systems believe, that seriousness and joy are opposites, that discipline and freedom cannot coexist, that the way to develop excellence is to trim away everything that is not functional, to reduce the player to their most efficient components, to eliminate the noise and keep only the signal. But Ronaldinho was the noise. The noise was the signal. The joy was not what happened after he played well. The joy was why he played well. There is a reason that people who watched Ronaldinho play describe the experience differently from the way they describe watching other great players. There is a reason that the footage of his best moments does not age the way other football footage ages, does not become merely historical, but remains immediate, alive, present in a way that makes it feel like it is still happening. There is a reason that children who were born after his peak years still watch compilation videos of his play and feel something that is not quite admiration and not quite inspiration, but something closer to recognition. A recognition of something they already knew was possible in football, but had never quite seen expressed so completely. It is because he was playing the game the way the game is supposed to feel, not the way it is supposed to look to a tactics board, not the way it is supposed to function in a system, the way it is supposed to feel when you are a child and the ball comes to you, and for 1 second the entire world contracts to this. Just this. The weight of the ball on your foot and the space in front of you, and the absolute freedom of what comes next. Most players, as they become professional, as they become serious, as they become part of systems and structures and tactical arrangements, lose that feeling entirely, or they learn to access it only occasionally, briefly, in the rare moments when everything aligns and the game opens up and they are briefly, beautifully free. Ronaldinho carried it with him always. That is what the smile was. That is what the laughter was. It was not performance. It was not calculation. It was a man who had somehow managed to remain at the very deepest level of his relationship with football. The child who played in Vila Nova because playing football was the most alive he ever felt. The coach in Porto Alegre had looked at that aliveness and called it a problem. He was not alone in this. He was not unusual. He was entirely typical of how institutions respond to talent that does not fit standard molds. The history of almost every creative field contains these stories. The teacher who told the artist to be more realistic. The professor who told the scientist to be more conventional. The coach who told the footballer to be more serious. Those who listened, who trimmed themselves to fit expectations, had careers, decent careers. But the ones who kept going the way they were going, the ones with something stubborn and essential that refused to be reduced, those are the ones we remember. Ronaldinho kept going the way he was going. And we remember him. There are things in Ronaldinho's career that were not perfect. Greatness and perfection are rarely the same thing. But none of that is what the coach in Porto Alegre was thinking about when he sat with the journalist. He was thinking about the boy he had seen in 1994, the boy with the bag over his shoulder walking off the pitch. He was thinking about what he had failed to recognize. And he was thinking about all the players he had coached since, wondering, honestly, uncomfortably, how many of them he had made the same mistake with. How many he had told to be serious, when what he should have done was learn from them. Because this is the other thing that coaches, that teachers, that parents, that anyone who works with young people and young talent, sometimes fail to understand. Sometimes the child knows something you don't. Sometimes the thing that looks like a problem is actually the point. Sometimes the job is not to fix what is broken, but to protect what is whole. The coach had not protected it. He had tried to fix it. And the thing he tried to fix was not broken. It was the most important thing there. Years later, a journalist asked Ronaldinho in a separate interview if he had any memory of being rejected by coaches in his early years. If those rejections had affected him. Ronaldinho thought about it for a moment. Then he said that he did not remember the rejections very clearly. Not because they had not happened, but because what he remembered most from that time was the playing. The feeling of the ball. The grass under his feet. The way everything else went quiet when the game started. He said he had never really understood why people thought joy and seriousness were different things. He was completely serious about joy. He took joy very seriously. It was the most serious thing he knew. The journalist wrote that down and read it back later and understood that it was not a joke. It was the most complete explanation of everything, of the Bernabéu ovation and the Ballon d'Or and the children watching compilation videos. 20 years later, feeling something they could not name, but that felt like being reminded of something important. He was completely serious about joy. He took joy very seriously. The coach in Porto Alegre had been serious about seriousness. And he had sent a 14-year-old boy home with a bag over his shoulder, and the quiet certainty that the people who could not see what he was were simply not looking at the right thing. He had been right to go home. His mother had been right to tell him what she told him. And football, the game itself, the beautiful, impossible game, had been right to keep giving him the ball. Because when the ball came to Ronaldinho, things happened that could not happen otherwise. Things that made 80,000 people in an enemy stadium get to their feet and clap. Things that made goalkeepers shake their heads and almost smile, despite themselves. Things that made children watching on television stop what they were doing and lean closer to the screen, their faces changing, that particular light coming into their eyes that only comes when something real, something genuinely, undeniably, extraordinarily real, is happening in front of them. The coach sent him away in 1994 because he did not play seriously enough. In 2002, Ronaldinho stood on a pitch in Japan with the World Cup in his hands laughing. In 2004, he lifted the Ballon d'Or laughing. In 2005, he ran toward the corner flag at the Santiago Bernabéu while 80,000 people gave him a standing ovation, laughing. And somewhere in Porto Alegre, a coach sat with a journalist and said, quietly, without excuses, I told him football was serious. He showed me football was joy. I was wrong about what serious meant. Some lessons arrive early, some arrive late. The important thing, the only thing that matters, really, is whether they arrive at all. This one arrived. And to the coach's credit, he did not look away from it. He sat with it. He let it change the way he saw things. He carried it with him into every subsequent session with every subsequent young player, looking more carefully, listening more closely, asking himself the question he had not thought to ask in 1994. What if this is not a problem? What if this is exactly who they are? And what if exactly who they are is the whole point?